Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here on a Saturday. Really excited to talk to you about nutrition, and some of you already have heard some of my talks previously, but if it's new to you, then that's great. How many of you think you get enough fiber in your diet on a daily basis? Raise your hand. No? So I see like maybe 20% of you. And hopefully, by the end of this talk, I'll convince the rest of the 80%. So we'll talk about nutrition, we'll talk about diet, we'll talk about some trials we're doing, the microbiome, and then some practical tips on how to take this forward. So I want to start with just saying nutrition needs to be individualized, and while I'm giving a talk, of course, it's going to be very general for everyone. So you have to think about what works for you and what doesn't, and think about it. Are you newly diagnosed and this is overwhelming, or are you somebody who's finished the treatment and now are able to think about these options? And I think also, do you have metabolic disorders or other medical conditions like cardiovascular disease or diabetes or obesity and those things? Maybe there's more benefit in those situations. Again, even side effects to medications can affect how we think about food and our choices. And so I want you to think about all of this when we talk about it in context of that. So with that, I wanted to say that many years ago, not many, but like 8 years ago, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that experience made me think about nutrition much more as I had friends and family talk about it. And that's why when I started as faculty, I have focused my research around this and to looking at nutrition, microbiome, and the metabolism in cancer, especially myeloma. And so recently, a patient told me, like my doctor said, keep eating a balanced diet, and then I realized I have to figure out what I need to do because the onus is on me. And then I had some doctors tell me, oh, we shouldn't tell our patients anything more than just eat a balanced diet. So then I was thinking, like, what is a balanced diet, and how many people really know what a balanced diet is? And so these are the USDA guidelines, and if we just think about what that involves, and fruit is about 1.5 to 2 cups, vegetables 2 to 3 cups, and fiber at least 25 to 35 grams. And if you think about a healthy eating index, that it's a dietary score, and if you get 100, that's the best kind of score, but most Americans get a fail on that score and get like on average 60 or less than that. So when we think about percent Americans meeting this, it's 12% of Americans actually get enough fruit, 10% get enough vegetables, and less than 5% get enough fiber. And so it is very skewed in terms of the number of people who follow a balanced diet. So when we say eat a balanced diet, I think a lot of people don't really know what that means, and so they don't know what to follow really. There was a study looking at cancer patients and cancer survivors, and very similar numbers. And I don't expect it to be different because it's part of the US population in itself, right? So you're going to see similar results. So just to bring home the message as well, like this was a patient I saw many years ago with medical problems, multiple of them, and surgeries as well. So when a patient has so many medical problems, we want to do the best for the patient and treat them with all the treatments possible, but it's not possible to give a lot of therapies that are a little more intense. So the patient was not a candidate for transplant, not a candidate for CAR T cells, clinical trials, and things like that. So even if you don't think that nutrition affects the cancer directly, indirectly it's going to affect it, because if we're not in our best shape, we can't get the best treatments and really get that to improve our survival. And so I've marked in green things that I think could be avoided or prevented or even reversed with lifestyle changes over a lifetime, or even in a short period over time if we make the decision to. So then moving on to thinking about like why we should think about this and what population studies. So nutrition is a bit hard to study because you can imagine ask somebody to change their diet and then they have to keep it like that for a long time to see the outcomes or understand it. Whereas with a drug, it's like they take the drug or they don't take the drug. But with the diet is, do they take it 100%? Do they take it 50%? Like what is it? And so it's a much harder thing to study. So most nutrition studies actually look at populations and look at this on a population level and say on a population basis, who gets more cancer, who gets less cancer, whose diet, like which specific cancers and things like that. So I'm not showing you for overall cancer, but there were 3 studies in the UK, USA, and France showing these findings, like a 15 to 20% reduction in people who eat enough plant-based foods compared to those who don't for overall cancer. Remember, I'm not saying that diet will like prevent all cancer. It's just risk reduction in terms of what we're talking about. So this study looked at myeloma specifically, and you can see that they divided people into groups of vegans, vegetarians, seafood, and meat eaters, and those who were eating vegans, vegetarians had a 77% lower risk of myeloma. Again, this is a small study, so we have to think in context of everything else. We looked at, this is another study that was published, and this showed about a 16% increased risk with inflammatory dietary patterns, such as the Western diet. And then we did a study where we didn't really classify people as vegans, vegetarians, because I think that becomes a little bit harder to do in terms of enough population. So we just we used a dietary score and said those who had the highest group of eating plant foods compared to the lowest group. And we saw a 17% lower risk in the highest group compared to the lowest group for risk of myeloma. And we looked at the same thing with MGUS, or the precursor situation, monoclonal gammopathy, and we saw sugary drinks, artificially and naturally sweetened, were associated with a 40 to 60% increased risk of MGUS, and fruits, vegetables, whole grains with a lower risk by about 40%. And so we think that some of these mechanisms around eating enough fiber come from the changes in the microbiome in terms of short-chain fatty acids that they make, like butyrate, the phytochemicals or flavonoids, which have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects, better weight balance, less insulin resistance, and insulin-like growth factor, inflammation changes, and then maybe cancer risk reduction. And these are the guidelines based on, like I showed you a few studies in myeloma, but there are lots of studies in different cancers as well. And what the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research do is they take all the data that's available in every cancer, and then they try to summarize it and say, what are we seeing that's common themes, and what should we tell people for cancer prevention? And what they showed, and you can see here, out of the 10 guidelines, 6 out of the 10 are related to nutrition, and you can see that they're also talking about a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans, and limiting red processed meats, sugary drinks, and fast food, processed foods, alcohol. So some of you may know this answer, but do we have more human or bacterial cells in our body? Is it because I'm asking or because it's true? It's both. So we do have more bacterial cells in our body by a lot more. We are about 30 trillion human cells and 38 trillion bacterial. And of course, the bacteria are much tinier, so you don't see them, but you're really made more of bacteria than human cells. And so I think it's really important when you think about what you eat, you think about what they want to eat, because they're the first ones who metabolize the food that you give them, and then it comes to you to basically process. So having a healthy microbiome is going to help you have a healthy immune system and health overall. So there's a lot of data around the microbiome in health and disease. And with this, what you can understand from this figure is that when we have good microbiome, and this is the intestine inside our gut lining, and when the microbiome is healthy, the mucus layer, which is supposed to be there, stays good, and the microbiome is making all these molecules that modulate the immune system. They go into the bloodstream and overall affect the immune system. When there's gut dysbiosis, meaning that the microbiome is not so healthy or good, that time they start eating the mucus layer in some ways, and that leads to inflammation in the lining, and then also inflammation systemically, and not just in the lining. And so there's a lot of data, and we're just scratching the surface, I think, of this, but that the microbiome is very central to health and disease in many different mechanisms and things. So one concept that you may have heard before or may not have that I want to talk about is microbiome diversity. And think about diversity as variety, and generally in anything, variety is good, and the same thing in the microbiome. So if you have a microbiome that looks more like a healthy forest with a lot of different species of different, like how a healthy forest, like a rainforest would have species of birds, animals, plants, insects, things like that. The same thing in the microbiome. You want many different types of bacteria, and that is a highly diverse microbiome. And then a plantation on the other end would be something like just banana trees or something like that. The same thing is if you have a microbiome with very few kinds of bacteria, that's not that healthy, and that's considered associated with worse outcomes. So this is one study from some of my colleagues at MSK that showed that after transplant, people who had higher diversity had better survival, progression-free survival, compared to those who did not. And I think that this is not just in myeloma or other things, overall health as well. When we look at other things, higher diversity is associated with better outcomes. So then you'll ask me, how do we improve microbiome diversity? Is that possible? And I think that we still need to study it in the context of maybe cancer, but I think we have some data that I'm going to show you next from our trial, but I'm showing you some of the data from healthy individuals. And when you want to, these were two studies. One looked at people's diet and then the microbiome diversity and composition, and they showed that people who ate 30 plus plant foods per week compared to those who ate less than 10 plant foods per week had better microbiome composition and diversity, because again, the plant foods is fiber rich and then feeds the bacteria. And so in this study, when they talk about 30 plant foods, you can see that what they mean is like if you are making a soup and you make it with many different fruits, like different vegetables and beans, then that would be the variety, because if you have carrot, potato, and onion, that counts as 3 different plants. But if you are eating carrots every day for 7 days, that still counts as just 1, so that doesn't count as 3. So the variety is important. And then this other study showed that those who eat more fermented foods, so 6 servings a day of fermented foods, actually had better gut microbiome diversity too. So again, it goes with the same thing that diversity is something that we could potentially modulate. Moving on to thinking about metabolic disorders and myeloma risk. So this is a figure from the NCI, National Cancer Institute, and you can see that it's showing you that overweight and obese, these are 13 cancers associated with elevated body mass index, and myeloma is one of them, suggesting that having more excess weight is associated with an increased risk of this cancer. And so similarly for diabetes too, although that association is a little less strong than with obesity. So with all of this information, where we know that the microbiome can impact outcomes, we know that eating more plant and fiber-rich foods maybe is associated with less cancer and myeloma, and obesity and diabetes are associated with myeloma. We wanted to understand is that if patients have the pre-cancer state, can we help them change their diet and see if we can slow progression to myeloma or prevent it for some patients? We do know that when people have these pre-cancer states, as they progress, and even with myeloma, as the disease progresses, there's more genomic alterations, meaning genetic changes, as you heard from Dr. Davies. And then the immune function also gets affected over time and gets more dysfunctional. And so if we can affect the immune function through these factors that we talked about, can we affect outcomes? Another study, 2 studies actually, looked at patients who have an elevated body mass index and MGUS, so the pre-cancer state, and they looked at what is the risk of progression. So when you see that number at the bottom saying 1.98, that means it's almost a 2-fold risk of progression if somebody has an elevated BMI. Same in this other study too. So elevated BMI doubles the risk for progression from an MGUS state to the myeloma. So can we help patients lose weight and maybe reduce the risk too? So this trial, the Nutrivention, we started about 5 years ago. In this study, patients were given a high-fiber plant-based diet for 3 months, coaching for 6 months, and then they were followed for 1 year. This were 20 patients who had an elevated BMI. We actually shipped them lunch and dinner for 3 months. We gave them coaching and breakfast ideas on what to eat, and we followed them for the year. What you can see is that we looked at, with the dietitian Francesca's help, we managed to calculate the dietary adherence, meaning out of the total calories somebody's eating in a day, how many of those calories are unprocessed plant foods compared to their total calories. And before the study, it was only 20%. And this is also, I think, better than the average of the US population because the study enrolls people who are a little more motivated or interested. This improved on the study up to 92% while we were giving them food, and it stayed up at 60% even after we gave them the food a year later, suggesting that they saw the benefits and they kept doing it because they learned the principles of it. We also were looking to see if there was some weight loss because we enrolled patients with an elevated BMI, and we saw about a 7% average reduction, and this maintained up to 1 year too. So the weight loss was not like they lost it and gained it back. Majority of patients were able to maintain it on average. We looked at quality of life too, and some people say like, oh, if you're telling people what to eat, maybe their quality of life goes down. But actually, we saw it improved overall in terms of them feeling better, having more energy, things like that. So we decided to survey the patients after the study just to basically answer this question of how do patients feel after they've changed their diet. And these are patient-reported, so it's completely what the patient responded in the survey. But you can see the green bars are things that the patient said improved for them. And you can see that some patients said anxiety, sleep, diabetes, prediabetes, the metabolic disorders, GI symptoms, many things improved. And we asked the patients, was this difficult or easy? And most said easy or very easy. I was surprised that nobody said difficult. And 4 patients said that they were able to save money as well because they were able to stop medications. So 1 patient stopped insulin, another stopped a potassium supplement, 1 stopped an antidepressant. So they felt better and they were able to come off some of these medications. Then you might ask, like we talked about diversity and we talked about, we didn't talk about insulin as much, but I touched on it briefly. So we managed to actually see the insulin levels come down too, which is good. We saw diversity improve. So remember, we said higher diversity is better. We saw the diversity improve at 12 weeks, but it remained improved even at 1 year. So whatever we taught them, they were able to do, even though they didn't do it completely, it still helped them keep that high diversity or improve diversity, which is great. We saw inflammation drop by 50%. Only 7 patients had elevated inflammation markers, so I understand this is a very small number, but in those patients that had an elevated number, it dropped by 50%. Those who had elevated cholesterol above 100, it dropped by an average of 20 points. We also did very deep immune studies, and that also showed improvements, which I'm not going to go into in the interest of time. These were 2 patients whose numbers were progressing before they went on the study. So the blue lines are the number of their M spikes before going on the study for about 20 to 40 months before the study. And then the 20 months after the study is in red dashed lines. And you can see that the progression trajectory slowed down for these patients in the sense that it looked like the disease was slowing down in terms of the rate of progression. This was one of our patients on the study, and it's with his permission. This was him before, and this was after. And he was the one who was able to stop insulin and come off that and improve that M spike trajectory as well. So then it's also sometimes hard to study these things in humans because it takes decades to see effects sometimes, or even many years. So doctors like to see that, can you confirm this in a mouse model, because that is like a very controlled experiment. You can ensure exactly what they're eating and all of that. So with colleagues in Italy, Dr. Matteo Bellone, we did an experiment where we had half the mice with smoldering myeloma eat their standard mouse diet, and these were normal weight mice, and the other half of the mice, we gave them a high fiber diet, and then we saw what happened. And we see that actually the mice who ate the high fiber diet, half of them never progressed to myeloma. And in the mice that ate the standard diet, all of them progressed. This was quite like promising, because if you see, the control diet was not a Western diet. It was not a like high sugar, high fat diet. It was a standard mouse diet. And compared to that, we did a high fiber diet. So with that, we are also partnering with the HealthTree Foundation. If you have smoldering myeloma and you live anywhere in the US, you can take part in this study. So if you know patients who might be interested, this is a very short study, but we're trying to understand the effects on the microbiome. And they can anybody who participates can do it from their home, and they just need to sign up through the HealthTree platform. And then we reach out and we ship you the intervention and the stool kits, and then you ship it back to us. So this is what we call a decentralized study design, so it's less burden on the patients, and they don't have to come in to our clinics. This study is also enrolling. This is patients with MGUS and smoldering myeloma, but the patient needs to come to MSK for 5 to 6 visits spread over a year. And these patients will get the diet, or they'll get supplements like curcumin omega-3 that we're testing, and then they're followed for 1 year. So lastly, moving on to just thinking about like diet with standard therapies, can it improve outcomes? And I wish that I could say we had studies in myeloma looking at this, but at this point we don't. We do, hopefully that's something that we do in the future, but at this point we don't have those answers. But I think that if we're seeing it in the pre-cancer, hopefully we see similar things. But even if we didn't see that, like I explained to you, there are other reasons why we want to think about it. And then when we think about to improve survival, can we prolong that PFS time, or the time in remission, if we're doing some of these things and looking after ourselves? I showed you diversity is associated with survival. And then I also showed, I want to show you the study that we did at MSK with my colleagues, Dr. Lisokin, Dr. McLachlan, Dr. Durkach. So what we did is we took patients who were on lenalidomide maintenance after their treatment, the induction and transplant, and we looked, plus minus transplant, and we looked at their microbiome. We didn't ask them to change their diet or anything. We just looked at microbiome and their diet and saw if there's any association with sustained MRD negativity. For those of you who are not aware, sustained MRD negativity is looking at complete response, or the best kind of response where you don't see the disease. And we see that those who have higher diversity have higher sustained MRD negativity. Those who have more butyrate producers or healthier bacteria also are more likely to be sustained MRD negative. And we see an association with plant proteins, seafood proteins, and also flavonoids, which are seen in plant chemicals, basically plant foods. So we think that diet may affect the microbiome, which we showed you, and then through that affect the immune system, which we've also already seen in our pre-cancer study, which may affect myeloma control. We are doing this study looking at quality of life in about 100 patients on maintenance therapy. Half of them get lenalidomide and half daratumumab, but we're also looking at a subgroup of those patients getting the diet to see the effect with immune therapies. So with that, I'd like to just conclude with a few tips, or how do we think about this, because I think sometimes it can get overwhelming when you hear a lot online, and oh, this has too much fat, this has too much protein, this has too much fiber, or it's the other way around, we need more fiber, we need more protein. Just yesterday I was talking to somebody who said, oh, I need to eat fiber, and then they were buying bars which are high in fiber, and they said, I need to get at least 30 grams of fiber, so I'm going to buy 5 bars which have at least 10 plus grams of fiber in them. But my response to that is, all plant foods have fiber. If you can just eat them, you'll actually get natural sources of fiber. And I don't think that what we do when we eat those bars with fiber is the same as what we do when we get it through our diet. Because those bars, to get that high fiber, they actually add back fiber, which is isolated from the plants. So it's a very processed food. And then they also put quite a bit of sugar in it. So then you're eating a lot of different things with it, and you're not really getting that true benefits that you would with a whole food that we're talking about. And so thinking about carbohydrates, whole grains, another thing when you buy bread, often this also I've seen happen, it's like very confusing, and they do a good job confusing us by putting labels saying healthy, whole grain, stuff like that. But if you actually look at the ingredients, you should learn how to look at the labels. And in that label, it will say whole grain flour or whole wheat flour. When it says the word whole, that means you know it's whole grain. If it says just wheat flour as the first ingredient, it's not whole. And so it is a refined grain in some ways, even if it says wheat flour. And then another thing is some breads will add a lot of sugar, but they might do something to confuse you where they'll put 3 types of sugar: honey, molasses, sugar. And because they put 3 types of sugar, it comes later in the ingredients list, so you think there's not much sugar in it. But actually, if you add up all the sugar and you look at each slice has a teaspoon of sugar in it. So you're eating bread thinking, oh, I'm eating this healthy bread, but you're actually eating it with sugar and added fiber in a way that's very processed. So try to buy these, when you look at things, and if you're buying packaged goods, look at the label, see if it can have less processing and less sugar, the added sugar back. There are enough bread which is just made with salt, yeast, whole grains. Things like that is something you want to look at. So when we think about carbohydrates, whole, unrefined, processed, refined carbohydrates, we want to reduce. Sugary foods and drinks, we want to reduce. Fiber, more than 30 grams. Protein, prioritize plant proteins over animal sources. I think beans, tofu, tempeh is underused, especially beans. 1 cup of beans is 15 grams protein and 15 grams fiber, so you can get quite a bit of that in both just by adding a cup a day. And then unsaturated fats is also, and then the fermented foods, I told you why that's important. Lastly, I think calorie counting is very difficult to sustain long term. And it's not the same thing as losing weight, eating a healthy diet, because it will lead to a lot of rebound and weight gain, weight loss, and things like that. What we want is a steady weight loss that you can maintain. And so I think doing some of these healthy tips and having a gradual, slow weight change is much healthier. And then thinking about, frozen fruits and vegetables are equally, if not more healthy than fresh. So do not think that, oh, I don't have access to a grocery store and I can't buy it. Even canned beans are very healthy. So to say that I don't have fresh produce is not a full reason why you can't eat them, because you can buy them frozen and you can buy it in the pantry. So it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be raw salads every time. You can eat all of these things, but if you just plan it a little bit in advance and think about it, you can pretty much eat all the things you enjoyed, but you just need to change it a little bit and change the recipe around. And so lastly, I think people assume that when we're talking about eating more plants, we're saying everybody needs to be vegan. I think veganism comes from an ethical, environmental perspective, and that's where no animal products are used. But it can be very healthy because you're, again, prioritizing plant foods. Vegetarianism is also ethical, religious reasons, but a lot of vegetarians eat a lot of dairy, a lot of fried, a lot of sugar, so then it's not considered a healthy diet, I would say. But what we're talking about is a high-fiber, plant-based diet where most of your calories are coming from unprocessed plant foods, and then you may add things that really float your boat or things that you may miss for the small amount of those calories, and think about whether you want to be vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Mediterranean, whatever suits you. So I would say maybe you all pick one goal at least to begin with and think about what you want to do so you can start gradually and you don't have to do everything all at once. This is a dietary survey we are doing with the HealthTree Foundation. If you fill it out, at some point we try to send you back a response. This is based on USDA guidelines, so it is basically what those guidelines say and tell you if you are meeting the dietary guidelines or not. Sure. So with that, we're hoping in the future we can do more studies. Of course, we need funding to do them, and that's the rate-limiting step. And then with that, I think we need to change our focus from just focusing on PFS and OS and survival to living healthier and longer, and not just longer. And I think nutrition, fitness, all of those are important and to improve quality of life. With that, I'd really like to thank my colleagues, my funding sources, the patients who've taken part, and really the team. This is a team science, and it's not possible to do it alone. And the HealthTree Foundation, of course, for believing in this very early on, and Jenny.